Hello, I'm Eddie V, and welcome to another episode of Reef Talk. And today we're going to be talking about the 7 fish beginner aquarists should avoid to keep when entering their hobby. This is going to be a scale from 7 to 1, and which I grade to be my least hardest fish to keep to the number 1 hardest fish to keep ever, and I have never attempted even to keep it, and you should avoid too. Now, the way this grading system works, at number 7, that's when a beginner aquarist who is ready to keep their first hardest fish should start attempting to keep that fish. Otherwise, if you're still a beginner and have less than 1 year experience, you should totally avoid keeping that fish. And at number 7, we got moray eels. Now, why do I say to avoid to keep moray eels? Even though in my other YouTube videos, I actually keep a snowflake moray eel in my reef tank. Number one reason, beginner aquarists can make a mistake and put a moray eel into a tank that has small fish that the moray eel can swallow. Like for example, a snowflake moray eel can eat a small little goby when it gets hungry. Now, that's the only reason why I grade moray eels to be number 7. Once you're ready to keep a moray eel, you gotta make sure you have a big enough fish and that you're gonna keep it well fed, otherwise it could get hungry. And at number 6, we have surgeonfish. Now, just because the movie Finding Dory came out does not mean you have to go ahead and buy a regal tank. You gotta have a few factors to expect when keeping this. Factor number 1, regal tanks are prone to disease. So that means they're very high prone to ick if they're stressed out. And technically, they're extremely hard to keep. I actually went through, I believe, 3 regal tanks before I could actually keep successfully one in my reef tank. And that one is doing fabulous, but that one I got from Live Aquaria. And some fish stores will lie to you that it's healthy. Never buy a small little tiny regal tank for 50 bucks, because that is definitely not worth it. You got to make sure they're well fed and they don't look like they're losing color, and that they're not skinny, and they're ready to be transferred into a quarantine tank or right into your tank. You got to make sure that you get the ones that have been living in the tank for at least a year. And that has to do with other surgeonfish. Surgeonfish are highly prone to ick, and they will get stressed out, including the shipment. For whatever reason, I've seen surgeonfish, the brown powder tanks, completely healthy in the tank, and next day they're floating up dead. That just shows that either they were cyanide poisoned, or the other factor is that they do not handle the shipping process that well. And that's a true factor. Surgeonfish do not really happen to do well with a shipping transfer. Now, tangs are very similar to surgeonfish. They both have this sharp object around their tail. That's why they get their name surgeonfish. It looks like a surgeon's tool. But tangs are more easier to keep than surgeonfish. Tangs are more hardier, especially the yellow tang. Now, if I was gonna go with a tang or a surgeonfish for your first fish to keep out of that species, that would be the yellow tang. They're not as aggressive as the regal tang, and they're very good hardy fish. So, another factor that you gotta get is that regal tanks are aggressive. They're actually one of the most aggressive surgeonfish in a reef tank. And at number 5, we have triggerfish. Ask me, why did I choose at number 5 triggerfish? Some of them are actually easy to keep, like the Picasso triggerfish, or like one of those blue-throated triggerfish, or like a Niger triggerfish. Here's why. They will eat corals of all types. They will destruct the tank. They can even move rocks from places to places. If you have problems with big hermit crabs or turbo snails moving around rocks and corals, Watch this one. Even if they're reef safe, they could move around potentially your corals because they like to have their surroundings the way they want to. They're aggressive fish. And not only that, they have to have special food. It's like clams, they won't really eat brine shrimp or for example, mysis shrimp. They usually will eat like clam and bigger type meatier foods. They require special food diets. That is why I rate them number 5, even though you can stick them in a new, well-established tank and have success with them. But here's the thing, you gotta watch out for that they can move around rocks and potentially cause damage to your corals and vertebrates and maybe even crack your glass. Who knows, depending how the rock will tumble down after they moved it, because these are very aggressive fish. Now at number 4, we got madryn goby. That includes the red madryn goby, that includes the green spotted madryn goby, and that includes the green madryn goby. The green and the green spotted are not the same. The green and the red madryn goby are actually similar, except the red has a lot more red to it, while the green obviously has a little bit more green and blue to it. The green spotted is what I have currently in my tank. They're actually, for an established Aquarius, they are relatively easy to keep once you got the right type of food for them. They generally like copepods, or those little tiny bugs that they eat that form off of your live rock. Now, they do love tiger pods, but tiger pods tend to die because they like cold water, not warm temperature water of 78 to 80 degrees in your reef tank. They like temperatures of like 70, 68 degrees, which is very hard to have them survive in your reef tank because none of your fish and corals, including the madryn goby, will even try to live in that. They do not like cold water at all. They need a very good water temperature in order to survive. So that's why it is number 4 in my top 7 fish to avoid for a beginner Aquarius, because one, you gotta have good water parameters and you gotta have a good food source, whether it's live brine shrimp or when you get them weaned to eat frozen brine shrimp. That happened before, where they will eat frozen brine shrimp, but you gotta wean them into eating frozen brine shrimp. And you gotta have a good pod supply and a good well-established live rock system. That's why you gotta have plenty of cured live rock in your reef tank before being able to attempt to keep one. And number 3, we got the butterfly fish. All butterfly fish, period. Actually had, I believe, this is my 3rd butterfly fish that I have in an attempt to keep butterfly fish. I had the saddleback butterfly fish, and I had the copper banded butterfly fish, and this is my yellow long-nose butterfly fish that I have in my reef tank. That's the one I have the most success with. Now, the saddleback butterfly fish tend to be prone to disease. My copper banded butterfly fish would not eat live food, so he died eventually because he probably ate the whole pod population, and he was a little bit prone to ick at the same time. And my yellow long-nose butterfly fish, I finally got him to eat frozen food. But here's the thing, all butterfly fish tend to eat your pod population. All butterfly fish can pick on your coral, and the only butterfly fish that I had success with that would not eat coral or pick on it was the yellow long-nosed butterfly fish and the copper banded butterfly fish. But they still tend to pick on clams and scallops, and of course starfish. But I have a sand swifting starfish that actually hides under the sand, so he barely sees it and picks on it. But butterfly fish is considered my number 3. If I were gonna recommend you a butterfly fish to go with, to put in the reef tank, that would probably be the yellow long-nosed butterfly fish. But otherwise, stay away from butterfly fish until you're ready, because they love extremely good water quality and they need to be fed a wide variety of foods. And now we got 2 remaining fish that you're not supposed to keep as a beginner Aquarius. And these 2 I have not even attempted to keep in the reef tank or any other tank before. And they're highly beautiful, and it's like love at first sight on that fish, and the Aquarius gets tempted to buy it, and then 3 days later they're dead. That's why do not make a beginner mistake and stay away from these fish until you really have a lot of experience in your aquarium hobby. Now, number 2 is the regal angel. I could have put all large angelfish into that category, but as far as research I have developed on researching the regal angelfish. It is the hardest angelfish to keep in your reef tank or any other tank that you can buy, because there is other new angelfish that came out with that zoos have, like the peppermint angelfish. There's different types of angelfish that, for example, that are in zoos, but you cannot afford them because they're like $5,000. But this is where it's well in your budget, but it's very hard to keep. And regal angelfish, number one, why it's hard to keep, because like all large angelfish, it's a hit and miss, just like the butterfly fish. They can pick or they cannot pick, or they will not pick on your corals. So you gotta feed it well in order for it not to pick on your corals, because you have a wide variety of diets, like clam and a half shell, mice and shrimp, like you name it. They need a lot of food source, and your water quality gotta be in excellent condition. I see pictures and videos of regal angelfish in a huge reef tank, so I recommend a 180 gallon for that fish. The emperor angelfish can handle, a small one, juvenile, can handle maybe a 90 gallon, but for a little bit, all angelfish can be fast growers sometimes. So you got to think about it. The regal angelfish will grow a foot or more in length. So 180 gallon tank is essential for its well-being. Same to do with its food source and its water quality. And now, the number one fish that you should not attempt to keep in any tank whatsoever, but rather you gotta leave it in the wild and observe it in the wild or in the zoo. And that is the Moorish idol. Now, why would you say the Moorish idol? It looks like a beautiful fish, and I've seen it for sale in the pet shop and everything like that. Number one, I'll tell you, probably it was a special order, and a very well experienced aquarist was just gonna pick it up at the end of the day. He just wants to make sure it eats. And mostly in Britain, that's where they have more sources of different types of fish that you will not be able to have in America, because it's just that British people like to have new experience or something like that. But the Moorish idol is a highly beautiful fish, and every aquarist's dream is to have it, including my dream to have that in my tank. You gotta have at least a 180 gallon tank. I've seen them in 90 gallons, but that's just stressing out the fish. I might attempt to do it, but I gotta have way better water quality in my tank. That means you cannot have a lot of algae, no phosphates, and they're very hard to get them to feed. You got flake food won't work. Sometimes brine shrimp won't work, mice shrimp won't work, and I heard a rumor that their main food source in the wild is to eat acropora polyps in the wild. So they potentially are not reef safe. They'll eat all your SPS coral potentially. And I heard that they like to eat these veggie tips or whatever. Some guy on YouTube like gave them this flat like pellets that had vegetables. It's like a vegetable source food for the Moorish idol. It's very hard to feed, and chances are, even if you had them to feed and good water quality, one day, maybe in a year or 6 months, they'll just drop dead. They're just that hard to keep. Now there is one fish that, if it's so beautiful, almost exactly identical to it, but it's not in the same species. It's the bannerfish. That I would recommend to have instead of the Moorish idol, and it just happens to be the bannerfish is a butterfly fish. So here is my 7 fish that you should avoid to keep as a beginner. What fish did I miss? Comment in the section below and tell me what your hardest fish is to keep out there. I will gladly like to read your comments and your opinions of what fish is the most hardest fish to keep, or one of the hardest fish to keep in a reef tank, or just any regular freshwater only with live rock tank. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.